Hi, Microbehunter here, and today I want to respond to another question which I received. I'm studying biotechnology, so I think I'm going to need a phase or a DIC, referring to phase contrast or DIC microscope. Which one do you think is the best choice for biotechnology? So first of all, thank you very much for this question. I will give you an answer to this, but you have to allow me to tell you a personal story first, which kind of relates a little bit to that topic. I remember it was back in the year 1992. I just started to study microbiology, and after one of the lessons, I think it was a genetics lesson, after one of those lessons I went up to the professor who just had the lecture, and I asked him exactly the same question. I said, you see, I'm studying microbiology now, which microscope should I buy? And I have to admit that I received the most disappointing answer that I ever received. I expected that he's going to be very enthusiastic about the whole thing, and then he's going to give me a specific recommendation. Not at all. What did he say? Very disappointingly for me, he said, he looked at me and he says, "You don't need a microscope." He said, "Save the money and use that money to go skiing." I almost couldn't believe my ears when I heard that. Essentially, he said, in other words, it's a waste of time. Go on a holiday with the money, you'd be better off. And I remember that I was quite disappointed by that response. However, it took a few years, and then I actually understood what he actually meant with that. And I'm going to explain this to you now because I want to give you a little bit a less disappointing and a more productive answer than what I received from my professor. It's like this, that indeed, if you are studying microbiology, biotechnology, biochemistry, genetics, molecular biology, it doesn't matter. Chances are pretty good that you will not use microscopes very much during your university study, even if you're doing research. And the reason is that interestingly, many of the research that is done nowadays is actually moving away from an observation towards chemical analysis. Now, yes, there are certain research projects where microscopes do play a very important role. I'm not questioning this. And in this case, often you use fluorescence microscopes where you're labeling certain proteins in a cell with a fluorescent antibody, and then you're using UV light from the microscope to actually make those molecules light up. Very specific techniques, okay? So yes, there are microscopes used in research, of course, a lot, but often the applications are very, very specific. And it is like this, that the issue is that in recent years, even if you're studying botanics, which is the study of plants, or zoology, even then, depending on the research project, exceptions do exist, but even then, often microscopes are not as commonly used. I will never forget this one excursion to the Botanical Institute that I did when I was still a very young student. I did an excursion there. I thought at the Botanical Institute they study plants. Of course they do that, but what did they do when I talked to this one PhD student? Well, she was actually analyzing so-called transposons, which are jumping DNA sequences of a plant DNA. So even when you're doing botanics, even then the analysis and the investigations was very, very biochemical and genetic in nature. I'm not saying that this is always the case, but at least in those cases that I've basically, when I've talked with people, this was always the case. Microscopes, unfortunately, did not play a very important role. So what does this mean? This basically means that chances are pretty good that when you are studying biotechnology at university, and when you're doing a research project, then it is the task of the university to provide you with appropriate equipment. And then you will use the university or the college laboratory to actually do the research if you're working, for example, on a thesis, okay, on your bachelor's or master's thesis or PhD thesis. Then they will provide a laboratory for you with all of the equipment, and then I tell you, probably the microscope is only one of many devices that you're going to be using there. I studied microbiology, but used microscopes very, very rarely, actually. We only did it for a quick quality check to see if the sample was contaminated with other bacteria or not. But most of the time I actually used the so-called gas chromatograph, which it was analytical chemistry, actually. Yeah. So this is basically answer number one is that chances are pretty good you won't need it because the university or college will provide the equipment. And number two, the second reason why you won't need it is because biotechnology, molecular biology, and all of those biosciences nowadays are really not based so much on observation through a microscope. I tell you, most likely you're going to be analyzing biochemical pathways, and you'll be studying biochemical pathways. You'll do genetic engineering probably to optimize, some aspect in yeast or E. coli. Maybe you'll be designing or improving a reaction fermenter to increase the alcohol production of a certain yeast strain that you're using, whatever. But often it's like this, that microscopes are not that commonly used. Yeah, maybe to do a cell count to see how high is the yeast density of your fermentation. Maybe that could be done. But for that, you probably don't need phase contrast or differential interference contrast, DIC. Okay, so that is a little bit one of the things that we've seen a little bit in the last 50, 80, 100 years. Is we're moving away from doing science which is observation based towards science which is more which uses other methods of analysis. Okay, I have to admit now I'm getting a little bit personal. I realized this a few years after I actually started to study microbiology, and this, have to admit, disappointed me a little bit, because I started to study biology because I had a certain love of nature. Okay, and then all of a sudden I realized that the study that I chose, I liked it. It was very interesting, but actually it was very technical, very theoretical, very biochemical. And this is something that I feel that has been lost a little bit, because I started to study at university with somewhat a naive idea of this naive, romanticized 19th century science idea. You have a scientist with his microscope sitting in a room, discovering something and becoming famous because of seeing for the first time a certain organism. This was kind of my romanticized idea that I still had in my head. And this is not the case anymore, unfortunately, or often it's not the case. This has been lost a little bit in many cases. Now, I know that there are certain research projects that still are very much observation based, I really think that this is really great, and they use microscopes a lot. I don't know, maybe if you're doing some kind of a biodiversity study of insects, you're probably going to use stereo microscopes on an everyday basis. Or if you're analyzing foraminifera, which can be found in sand, those little shells, well, yeah, I'm quite certain that you will use microscopes a lot. But on the large scale, I feel, unfortunately, modern biosciences are moving a little bit into a different direction. Okay, and now to come back to your question, and precisely because of that, you should buy yourself a microscope. Okay, because this way you kind of recapture a little bit of this lost tradition, okay, of this lost fascination maybe of nature, of the love of nature. Okay, this has all been lost a little bit, and if you now complement your university or college studies by kind of using microscopes on as a hobby basis for amateur observation, I think then this kind of recaptures a little bit some of this lost feeling of exploration, I would say. Okay, so that is basically the reason. Buy yourself a microscope if you're studying biotechnology, not because you need it. Okay, because chances are pretty good that you won't need them, you won't need it at home. But buy yourself one, because most likely you will not be using microscopes very much during your university studies. Okay, so this is basically the recommendation. And now I still know does not answer your question, because you want to know, should you get yourself a phase or DIC microscope? And for those of you who do not know the difference, these are kind of specialized microscopes which allow you to see very fine structures which are transparent. Okay, so they basically allow you to see transparent structures much better. And the answer is the following. If you go to a company and ask for phase contrast or DIC, then most likely the answer will be already be given to you simply when they tell you the cost of these devices. Generally, DIC, I mean, I didn't look it up, but I would be surprised if it would cost less than several thousand euros or several $1,000s. Okay, so for amateur use, you gotta be you gotta have a thick wallet for that. Okay, phase contrast is a little bit cheaper, but also not so easy to get. You have to either buy this equipment secondhand, like I did here. Okay, that's a phase contrast microscope which I assembled together from used parts that I bought over eBay. So the price was reasonable. But if you want to buy this new, you're also it's also going to be quite costly, and you have to talk to brand microscope manufacturers who offer these microscopes. Generally, you will not find this in the low-end educational sector. Okay, so that is one thing. If you can afford it, buy whatever your wallet allows you to afford, because it will be then for hobby reasons and for amateur reasons. If I had the choice between DIC and phase contrast, I would definitely go for DIC. The reason is because I myself, I like to observe water samples, and it is like this, that DIC allows you to see unstained samples better, but it does not introduce so many optical artifacts. Okay, so it gives you a more natural picture. So that's why I would like, I probably would go for DIC if I had the choice. Fact is, I cannot afford it. Okay, that's on a different level. So on the other hand, if it's not phase contrast or DIC, then get yourself a simple bright field microscope with a decent condenser, a condenser that allows you also to attach a so-called dark field patch stop like this here, and then you'll also be fine. My advice is also, if you're serious about amateur microscopy, then also get yourself one where you can take pictures, so with a photo tube like they have here. Okay, I think the ability to take pictures is a very important thing if you're because it allows you much easier to document the things that you're actually observing. If you don't have a photo tube, then you can still always take pictures directly through the eyepiece using a pocket camera or mobile phone. This also works. So basically, you're not excluded from taking pictures if you don't have a photo tube, but it's simply much more convenient if you have it. And also, if you really want to do a lot of microscopy, I also definitely recommend that you get a microscope with basically a binocular one, because when you're sitting a long time behind the microscope, it's simply more convenient and more comfortable. Okay. Otherwise, get yourself a bright field microscope with achromatic objectives, 4 times, 10 times, 40 times at least. I personally also have a 20 times objective here, because 20 times is very good for observing water samples. If you want to observe yeast cells, and often in biotechnology you observe yeast cells because you're into brewing, alcoholic fermentation, you use yeast, then basically you can already see these cells with a total magnification of 100 times very easily, 400 times of course as well. And if you want to determine the cell count or the cell density, then you also need a special slide called a hemocytometer. They do not cost very much, and then you can actually also determine the cell count. And I'm saying this because I know that some people who are doing who are brewing their own beverages using yeast, sometimes they will do a quality check by doing a cell count, and then they also use microscopes, of course. But you do not need phase contrast or DIC or anything fancy or for that. Okay, you can use regular bright field optics for doing a cell count. So yes, I think this was a very deviating answer, was sidetracking a lot, and I simply want to summarize my main points. I would say the type of microscope that you should get or that you want to get depends very much not on what you study, but actually on the specific research interests that you have. And you cannot simply say that for the field of microbiology you need this type of microscope, or for genetics you need another one, or for biotechnology a third one. It doesn't work like this, because you need, for the specific research question, you need specifically equipped microscopes. I assumed that you wanted to use or want to buy a microscope not because you actually have a specific research goal, but because you're interested in using it as for amateur reasons to kind of complement your university studies for this. And for this reason, I would say you want to stay general purpose, and therefore go with a decent, good bright field microscope. If you do not have the money at all, if you really are low on money, which I think you might not be because you actually have highly, your requirements are quite high. But if you have really low, a very thin wallet, you can buy microscopes already for less than €100, less than $100. And basically with these you can also see quite a lot, and you can have a lot of fun with them as well. Okay, I wish you all the best, and leave comments if you have any comments to make. All the best. Happy microbe hunting as always. Bye bye. Bye bye.